But this is what I know for certain. Auburn is not bowl eligible. Alabama's playing for the SEC championship, still competing for the college football playoff, and has won the Iron Bowl 6 years in a row. Table this past week, you really could have confused last week's holiday as Halloween instead of Thanksgiving. All college football analysts wanted to talk about past week was how Jordan-Hare Stadium was a haunted house for Alabama football and how Auburn was going to prevent Alabama from making it to the SEC championship game and continuing to compete for a spot in the college football playoff. A chilly night on the plains didn't temper tensions for both sides as Alabama and Auburn kicked off the first Iron Bowl under the lights on the plains since 2007. Edgy was the word that Chris Fowler continuously used at the start of the game as both teams tried to find their footing early. And to the surprise of many Alabama fans, the Crimson Tide found themselves ahead early with the Connor Talty 45-yard field goal. Alabama would continue to extend that lead with two touchdowns from Ty Simpson hitting Isaiah Horton, and the Alabama defense was relentless early on, pushing Auburn to 4 3-and-outs in their first five possessions. Alabama fans started to believe that maybe the Auburn voodoo was gone and they were poised to cruise to an easy win down on the plains. But as we know, this is the greatest rivalry in college football, and there's a lot of pride on both sides. Auburn steadied themselves and were able to fight back to make it a 2020 tie under 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The definition of resiliency is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties. This 2025 Alabama team is a perfect example of that definition throughout this college football season. Needing to regain momentum and put points on the board, the Crimson Tide went 75 yards in 15 plays and capped off the drive with Ty Simpson hitting Isaiah Horton for the third time on a touchdown pass on a 4th and 2 from the Auburn 6-yard line. Auburn still had a chance to mount a comeback, but like much of the night where the ball was slipping through their wide receivers' fingers, the Tigers were not able to capitalize and fell short as Cam Coleman lost the ball after Bray Hubbard knocked it away and Deontay Lawson recovered the fumble with 33 seconds remaining in the game. For all the pregame talk about Jordan-Hare Stadium being haunted for Alabama, it may be time to analyze if Auburn resides in their own haunted house. The first Simpson to Horton connection was nearly the exact location where Alabama completed Gravedigger in 2023, and the second touchdown between Simpson and Horton was scored where John Mechie converted the two-point conversion in the fourth overtime in 2021, and both scores being capped off with the Crimson Crane. The question about Jordan-Hare Stadium being haunted will continue to circle until the next Iron Bowl in 2027. But this is what I know for certain. Auburn is not bowl eligible. Alabama is playing for the SEC championship, still competing for the college football playoff, and has won the Iron Bowl 6 years in a row. Michael, would you have ever thought that we would get back to Alabama winning the Iron Bowl 6 years in a row?
Well, the funny thing is, Nick Saban never did it. So if he didn't do it, it was going to be a little surprising that here we stand now, six in a row. And yes, I agree with you. For all the talk of the Jordan-Hare mystique and the Jordan-Hare voodoo, I think Alabama's exercised that in the last three trips. So 21, 23, 25, Bryce Young, Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, what did they all do? They were all clutch. They were clutch when Alabama needed it. They took their teams down the field and they won the game for their team. So, and then look, which team had the special teams, errors? Which team fumbled a punt in 23 to give Alabama a chance? Which team fumbled the ball late to make sure Alabama won that game? So again, a tremendous resiliency by Alabama. Proud of how they performed. Look, I was like everyone else. They went up 17-0. I'm like, whoa, Alabama may have a chance to really blow this open. So give Auburn credit, they came back. But again, Ty Simpson, he joins Jalen Milroe and Bryce Young, three quarterbacks who went into that place, showed no fear, and led their team back to win. I mean, tribute to all three of those quarterbacks and all three of those teams for doing that.
I don't know about you, and I won't say that there wasn't any fear at any point during the game, but even when Auburn started to make their comeback and did tie the game up at 20 apiece, I personally still felt that we would pull this game out somehow. I just had that feeling. Sometimes you get that feeling that, things are going to turn around, or when you're winning, things may go the opposite way. Just kind of that instinct. For some reason about this team, ever since going back to that Florida State game where we had our second episode and we're kind of down in the dumps a little bit because it was not the start to the season that we expected. There's just been something about this team that I felt like they would right the ship, they would figure it out, and they would find themselves in the SEC championship game like they did it, like they've done this year. And for all the talk about being fearful of Jordan Hare Stadium and the voodoo down there, one way you attack that fear is being aggressive. And we've got a head coach in Kalen DeBoer and an offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb who enjoy being aggressive. And I think some are surprised or really impressed with the 4th and 2 call that late in the game to go for it when we were on the 6 yard line instead of taking a chip shot field goal. That didn't really surprise me. I mean, I think that's what Kalen DeBoer is, and that's what he's done, and that's what he did at Washington. He ran an end around reverse in their rivalry game in the Apple Cup against Washington State 2 years ago with the college football playoff spot on the line when it was only 4 teams. And there's a lot of times we talk about being proud of the team and proud of the players, and I'm definitely proud of all these guys and how they've responded and showed that resiliency. But I'm really proud of Kalen DeBoer and how he's responded throughout this year. There were so many people who wanted him out of Tuscaloosa after game one, didn't think he was going to work out. And here we are, year two, back in the SEC championship game and starting to feel a lot better about our college football playoff opportunities. I'm really impressed by him because he's never taken a shot in the media, at the fans, or anything, in my opinion, relative to him or this team. He's just tried to stay steady, and you can definitely see that as far as how this team has performed, whether good times or bad, they've been able to persevere and continue to push forward, and now are achieving things that they set out to achieve before that first practice in summer ball this year.
Well, I would almost kind of, this is a funny way to describe it, but I would classify Kalen DeBoer as maybe the most affable or nice, aggressive coach you'll ever meet. So he can smile at you while he's stabbing you in the back with a fourth down play. And look, I'm like you. At no time did I even think that Alabama was not going to go for it on that 4th down and 2 because the precedent has already been set. You've seen this team do it all year long. There's never been one hesitation that they're going to do it. If it's on a certain side of the field and it's within like 4th and 3, 4th and 4, 4th and 2, they're going to go for it. Look, I had an opportunity to hear Kalen DeBoer speak in a different setting. He laid out his entire philosophy of coaching. Same thing with Ryan Grubb. He told everyone, "Look, this is what we do." And I knew exactly that he was going to do that. 4th and 2, I knew they were going to go for it. And credit to Ty. I guarantee you, probably that particular play they have practiced many times, and they're just waiting to have an opportunity to do it because that's how they do it. That's what they do. That's what he's done his entire coaching record, wherever he's been at. So he is not afraid of the big moment to make the big call. How about that? And yes, there's going to be a game when it doesn't work, and everyone's going to be down in the dumps about it. But just remember the games that he did make the call and it did work, and we just saw proof of that. This past Saturday in Jordan Hare.
I'm hoping for many years to come that this game kind of finds its spot as the 6:30 Saturday night game on ABC or ESPN. I wasn't real enthused with the broadcast that Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit put together for the game, though. Like I said, Chris Fowler couldn't use any other word than edgy, it seemed like the entire night. And all Herbstreit wanted to do was to bring in Bill LeMonnier for any typical, like any opportunity there was to talk about an officiating play. Bill LeMonnier had to come in and talk about it. I guess they haven't used him enough this year, and they got to get their money's worth out of having Bill up there with them. Um, but I also know that they needed to keep people interested in the game, and they probably also didn't expect. I mean, I even didn't expect us to jump out to a 17-0 lead. I thought we had that ability, but it'd probably be something later in the game where we'd be able to pull away because Auburn's offense would fall apart. And really give credit to Auburn. Their offense was falling apart early, and they put it back together and had some big plays. But that's one thing about this Alabama defense is it has done a pretty good job in making teams earn their points. We've given up some big plays, and that's typically the only way teams are able to score against us. If you get into a drive where it's 6, 7, 8 plays, we typically are able to find some negative plays in there that's either going to make you kick a field goal or get you out of field goal range and get the ball back to our team. So I give a lot of credit to our defense, and of course, got to give a lot of credit to a guy like Bray Hubbard, who, of course, had the fumble recovery, or excuse me, he created the fumble at the end of the game, but he had the interception also in the game as well. And all the negativity he took after the Florida State game, which I think he rightly deserved with his play, he has come back and been resilient and done a great job leading this Alabama defense the rest of this season.
Well, again, I think we talked about it before. This is not the Alabama defense that fans have been accustomed to for 17 years. It's not a smothering defense that's just going to pound a team into submission or choke them like a python. But this is a very situational and opportunistic defense. They know when to strike. It's more like a cobra versus an anaconda. So they may lull you to sleep, and then yes, the other team piles up more yards than you like. But then at the right time, at the right moment, they come up with the big play, and they either get off the field or they flip the field with a turnover. So credit to them. Again, it's going to take still takes a little getting used to because that's not what we've been seeing. But it kind of grows on you here because everyone likes the turnovers. How about that?
Before we move away from the Iron Bowl, just a couple things that I wanted to mention as far as historical numbers. Alabama improves to 29-1 as a ranked Alabama team against an unranked Auburn. Uh, Kalen DeBoer becomes the second Alabama coach ever to start 2-0 against Auburn when his coaching career at Alabama, the other one being Gene Stallings. And Kalen DeBoer joins a large group of Alabama coaches, except for Mike Price, who never eventually coached a game, or Coach Whitworth back in the mid 50s, that have at least had one 10-win season at Alabama when they became head coach. And that goes all the way back to the 1920s. And you and I were talking about that a little bit after the Alabama Auburn game. And I think that really shows how strong the Alabama program is. Yes, we've had great coaches in Bear Bryant, in Nick Saban, in Gene Stallings, Wallace Wade, Frank Thomas, now what we hope in Kalen DeBoer. But I think that this shows that Alabama is one of the greatest programs, if not the greatest program in college football history, and not just buoyed up by great coaches. You do have great coaches that help do it, but it's a program that stands the test of time, not just a couple decades here and there of dominance.
Well, it is a testament to the program. And look, you do need great coaches, but the reason you get great coaches is because you have an administration and a fan base that demands excellence. They're not going to tolerate being bad for too long. So the commitment is there from the administration, from the fans that they want to see a good team, a good product, something they can stand behind, and they're not going to tolerate anything less than that. So that's part of it too, as well. It's a little bit of everything that goes into it. So again, I believe the reason you have good coaches is because you have fans that demand you go get good coaches. We're not going to sit here and just waller for and just being terrible for year after year after year. Make it, fix it, and let's get this ship righted. So again, it's a little bit of everything. This is a program that demands excellence, and they will not tolerate anything less than that.
Well, believe it or not, we are on to the SEC championship game, something that many people probably thought wasn't going to be a reality after the first week of the season. Alabama will get to play Georgia again this year and again in the SEC championship game, as this has been Alabama's matchup for the past 3, 4 years every time Alabama's made it to the SEC championship game. Before we get into this year's game, we are going to jump into the Tide machine and go back in history. And we're going to start with the first time Alabama and Georgia ever matched up against each other in the SEC championship game. And that was back in 2012 in the older Georgia Dome before they finally built the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Michael, I know you were covering the game, so I'll let you go first as far as what you remember, your feelings covering the game, and what you remember through your eyes as far as how that game shook out.
What I remember about that game was that was two great teams just going right after each other. No, no, no hesitation. And look, the talent on that field, I mean, I would say that that probably rivaled the 2011 Alabama LSU game. You had a lot of look, you had Todd Gurley out there, Alec Ogletree. You had a lot of talent on the Georgia side, and everyone knows this. Everyone in the Southeastern Conference knows this. That was the national championship game. Notre Dame was not the national championship game. If Georgia had won, they would have done the same thing to Notre Dame that Alabama had done. I feel very confident in that. It was a fantastic game. That is one of the best SEC championship games that I've ever had the privilege of covering. Back and forth affair. Look, you had Alabama go down by 11 in the third quarter with a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown. And everyone's thinking, I'm even thinking, I'm starting to have a little doubt going, maybe we won't be going to South Florida on this one. But credit to Alabama. They made the commitment behind a historic offensive line and running backs like Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon. You know how they answered? They just answered saying, we're just going to come back and we're just going to out tough you. We're going to run the ball right down your throat on back to back drives. And that's what they did. And they ran in a 2 point conversion. So a great game, thrilling game. And then you even had the pass to Amari Cooper. And then you had Georgia running out of time. You had a little bit of everything. So one of the wildest and most fun games that I've had the privilege of covering there at the Georgia Dome.
I was at the game and I remember when Georgia did block the field goal and it bounced perfectly for Alex Ogletree at about midfield and he ran into the end zone. And like you said, at that point it was 20 to 10, 21 to 10, midway through the third quarter. Our touchdown came it to get to 10, came late in the second quarter, and then we got an interception from Aaron Murray and got a field goal late in right before halftime to make it 10-7 and went into halftime up 10-7. But the offense just wasn't really clicking. And you had AJ McCarron at quarterback. As you said, you had Amari Cooper on the outside. And we would end up running the ball very, very well with Eddie Lacy and TJ Yeldon, but it took a little time to start doing that. And I was trying to remember going back into the schedule of why I felt after that Georgia blocked that kick that I didn't feel confident that we were going to come out and win the game and have a chance for a back-to-back national championship. And we had just beaten Auburn 49 to nothing. We'd beaten Western Carolina, I think 49 to nothing. But the two games before that were Texas A&M at home with Johnny Manziel, where we lost 29-24. And the game before that was LSU down in Death Valley, where we did nothing in the second half until the last drive of the game, where McCarron hits TJ Yeldon on the screen pass, and we still won in Death Valley 21-17. And so maybe that's why I was feeling a little bit that the game was over because I'd seen this Alabama offense really struggle over the past couple of weeks. But like you said, give a credit to the team. And I think Doug Nussmeier was off to coordinator at that time. They just decided we're going to run the ball right at Georgia. And that's what they did. And you're right. A big play was that 2 point conversion, making it 21-18. And I know Coach Saban did that to make it where a field goal could tie the game if you got back into the red zone or needed a field goal to tie the game. But that became a huge play because as Georgia, tried to mount a furious comeback late at the end of the game, which before I get to that, I've always felt D. Milner intercepted that ball. And I still don't know
Oh,
where they found the camera angle to say that that ball hit the ground. So they always say, Alabama's sending the checks to Birmingham. It's not the case. Anyway, going back, Georgia makes their furious march down to basically inside the 10-yard line. We get the tip pass. Chris Conley catches it, inbounds, clock runs out. If we don't convert that 2 point conversion, either, we had kicked the extra point, made it 17-21 at that point. Georgia would have an opportunity to kick a field goal and tie it, or we don't get the 2 point conversion, and maybe it gets a little bit different. We would have gone for two again or something like that. But Georgia could have been winning the game with a field goal opportunity late. It was an incredible game. I can still visualize the play to Amari Cooper. Felt like that was something we had all night. Amari was so good off the line of scrimmage. He got a free release, beat the Georgia cornerback, just put it out there perfectly for him to run into. And where I was sitting, we had a group of Georgia fans that were in the row in front of us. And as many people know, Georgia fans like to bark. And they were barking basically for 3.5 quarters at that point. Well, we go take the lead, and when we're on defense, myself, my dad, my brothers, and I, we're into the game. We're making a lot of noise. And for some reason, they did not appreciate that. So we had a little discussion back and forth. Luckily, they got out of there when they thought D. Milner intercepted the ball and didn't come back, so it didn't get even more intense. But that was it was a wild game. It was a stressful game, and very, gave out Alabama the opportunity, of course, to go back to back. Almost went back to back to back the next year. But like you said, that ended up really being the national championship game that year. And one of the all-time greats as far as SEC championship games go.
Absolutely. Absolutely one of the best.
So the next time these two teams actually faced in Atlanta was not for the SEC championship, but it was for the college football playoff national championship in 2018. First time in the new Mercedes-Benz for hosting the national championship. Alabama had played in there earlier that season, beating Florida State. Georgia had played, beating Auburn in the SEC championship. You had Jalen Hurts, of course, starting for us. You had Jake Fromm starting for Georgia. Both teams started off very slow. Georgia started to find their momentum a little bit and got a late touchdown with a couple of field goals, went in at halftime 13-0. What do you remember when halftime came around of that game as far as your confidence level? I don't think the news had come out yet that Tua Tagovailoa was coming in, but what were you kind of feeling at halftime watching that first half for Alabama?
So I was like, well, I won't say if I was like most, but I was taking the opinion of like, I mean, I hate to say this, but if we don't do something drastically different, Alabama is not going to win this game because they can't move the ball against this Georgia defense the way they're doing it. They were not dynamic enough on offense. And then look, credit to the coaching staff and Saban for making the call to putting a freshman out there over your reigning SEC Player of the year before, and the tough call to replace Jalen with Tua, but. Tua comes out. Remember, he goes 3-and-out on his very first series, so it takes him another series to actually get going. But his ability to get the ball vertical added a dimension. And look, that's been the Achilles heel against Georgia when they play Alabama. Alabama's been able to attack them a lot going vertically in these last few games, and that's their kryptonite. It's their secondary. You get some good receivers back there, and a quarterback can get the ball. Alabama can attack that Georgia secondary, and they've done that in many of these games and these championship games.
That was another wild game, not necessarily for the play on the field, but maybe some of the things that happened off the field. If you remember, we had an Alabama player fall out on the sidelines that had to be carted off midway in the second half. We also had players fighting each other on the sidelines. I mean, you really thought that if that game did not go Alabama's way, and there's been a lot of talk about the dynasty crumbling and all that. You'd had 2015 a couple years before that, but there were some cracks that were visibly being seen as far as Alabama football, even though you had all this talent, even though you had some really good players that were freshmen, like Najee Harris, like Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, somehow find a way to tie the game, had a chance to win it in overtime, didn't work out. Maybe worked out for the best for some people because became one of the more historic plays in college football, second and 26, which I don't know if anybody's ever asked Coach Saban, Brian Daboll this question. It's second and 26, and I believe the play that they ran was called Seattle, which was basically four verticals. Was there not like a discussion of let's get a little bit of this back and try to still work for a first down? I've never heard that question asked or that discussion of like, why did we just, it obviously worked out, but it wasn't like Devontae Smith was just the guy blowing it up, blowing it off the top and trying to run some routes underneath. We just sent four guys deep, and fortunately, Georgia had a blown coverage, and Devontae Smith only catch of the night being a 41-yard touchdown reception to win the national championship.
Well, don't forget the other key part of that is Tua did a good job of looking off the safety. So he freezes the safety so he doesn't come over in the cover two for the help on the coverage there, and that lets Devontae get the seam or the route that he wants on the outside, and Tua just throws it on a rope. I mean, a beautiful throw. Devontae never breaks stride, but yeah, you're right. That's a good question. Second and 26, most coaches would be like, all right, let's get a play that we get about 12 or 13 yards so we can make it manageable on third down. But no, they just said, no, we're going to go for it. And they went deep. So credit to all of them for that one. It was a heat of the moment call, heat of the moment play. And again, we talked about this earlier. You know, uh, big time coaches make big time calls in big games, and that's how you win or lose.
Well, I know there's a lot of Alabama fans out there that either recorded themselves or have pictures from that moment. My wife actually got a picture of me in our basement probably 20 seconds after Devontae Smith caught the touchdown pass. Yeah, there was a lot of excitement going on in that basement, a lot of surprise. You know, the game going to overtime and it being a Monday night and watching all the post game afterwards. I don't know about you. I don't know if I went to bed until like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning after that game. Just an incredible experience as an Alabama fan, and one that I had confidence, even if Jalen playing, you'd seen us win so many games, you just felt like we're going to find a way to pull this out. And lo and behold, we found a way to pull it out in maybe one of the most unlikely ways that anybody would have ever thought.
Well, I'm like you, same way. Regardless of the sport, whether it be Alabama, anything, you have a game like that. Yeah, I'm not going to sleep for a while. The natural buzz and excitement, the adrenaline's pumping too much, so I'm not going to bed anytime soon. So, even last week with all those Las Vegas games, man, I was probably up to 2:30 in the morning. So, it doesn't matter the sport. It could be a baseball, softball, basketball, or football game. I'm right there with you. I'm not going to bed anytime soon.
Well, that game was in January of 2018, and both these teams would see themselves again in Atlanta in 2018, but December of 2018 for that version of the SEC championship game. And as we all know, the roles got reversed as Jalen Hurts came in and saved the day. You know, I thought one of the plays from that game that doesn't get talked about a lot was Georgia was up 28-14, had the ball deep inside Alabama territory. They got stopped at about the Alabama 13-yard line, 4th and 3. And Rodrigo Blankenship for Georgia, who's a very, very good college kicker, missed a 30-yard field goal. And if Georgia makes that kick, they probably go on and easily win that SEC championship game. And I remember going into that game that Alabama had looked dominant the entire year, but there was a lot of talk from analysts and media that maybe Alabama didn't deserve to be in the college football playoff if they lost the SEC championship game to Georgia. But as we know, Jalen Hurts came in, led the team to an incredible comeback. Do you remember we'd seen it the year before where Jalen couldn't move the ball against Georgia. Was it too poetic to or did you have confidence when Jalen came in, or were you a little skeptical when he had to come in and save the day against Georgia in December of 2018?
So when Tua went out because he had those ankle injury and Jalen came in, you know, I was thinking the same thing most everyone else. Like the roles have been reversed, and I don't think Hollywood could even write this. They wouldn't dare to write something like this. There's no way they would make this believable. And honestly, I actually thought that okay, this is setting up perfectly, so we could have another miracle finish from Alabama. And look, we've talked about this. We just said it. You know, big time coaches make big time calls to win big games. Now think about this. We talked about Saban making the change with Tua. You just talked about making the call on 2nd and 26. Forget it. Let's just go for it. And they get it. Well, Kirby makes big time calls and they work against everybody but Alabama. And so there's the difference between Nick Saban, the greatest of all time, on some of these calls, and Kirby Smart, who is an outstanding coach, a great coach, but he has an Alabama problem. And why? Because when he makes the big time calls, they just don't seem to work against Alabama for some reason. And that's just crazy to even think that. But that's reality, and that's what happens. One play changes the perception of you to everyone.
So I remember that game, and that is a game where confidence level went like a roller coaster throughout the game. I had told a lot of people before the game started that I really thought Jalen Waddle was going to return a punt for a touchdown. So Georgia gets the ball first. We get a 3-and-out. They punt it to Jalen Waddle. And if he doesn't get all the way down the sidelines inside the Georgia red zone on the first punt, and I was feeling great. I thought we were about to blow Georgia out, but Tua ends up throwing an interception on that first drive, and that confidence started to dip. And then, as we know, they got to that 28-14 lead. But when Blankenship missed that kick, I mean, he doesn't miss 30-yard field goals very often, probably in his career. And that just started to breathe that life of, you know what, we're going to find a way to beat Georgia again. And that's even before we've had all these other games that we're about to get into that's added to this mystique against Georgia where we've been invincible. But the things were starting to happen where Alabama was going to come back. And I wasn't at the Georgia Dome, but I imagine, which I could be in play again this Saturday, when things start turning the Alabama's way, those Georgia fans are going to get very anxious, and it's going to seep into their team, and it's going to hinder their play, I believe, at some point during the game. So moving on to maybe the most historic Alabama athletics day in history, where Alabama really taught the Bulldogs to behave, not only on the football field, but the basketball court. The 2021 SEC championship game between Alabama and Georgia, where nobody gave Alabama a chance in that game. And for good reason, Alabama had struggled throughout the year, had been banged up at times. Didn't have the best offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien. I feel like I can confidently say that now. And Georgia was really, really good and had been dominant through the entire year. But Alabama comes out on top, 41-24, set the stage for, as I mentioned, one of the more historic, fun days to be an Alabama fan. What do you remember going into, I mean, that day as a whole? Because it wasn't just the football game for you, me, and some of our other people listening to this podcast. That was a football and a basketball day that could have been a miserable day, and like I said, was one of the greatest days ever for Alabama athletics.
Now, what that Saturday in December was one of the in 2021 one of the greatest days in Alabama athletics history, short of winning a national championship in either sport. Look, you had a tremendous performance by Bryce Young and those receivers to take down Georgia, who was ranked number one. And had Gonzaga not lost a little bit earlier, the basketball team would had a chance to take down the number one team. As it was, they were just number three. How about that? But you go into Seattle, you beat number three Gonzaga there in a neutral site, but basically their backyard. A wonderful day, great day. You're right. Taught the Bulldogs to behave. It was very appropriate to be in the lyrics of Yeah Alabama. And I just remember at the end of the day, I was like, I don't know if it can get any better than this. So I don't know. I should just stop right now for a little while. I don't need to watch any more Alabama athletics for at least several weeks because I can't imagine anything topping the results of this day.
I'm honestly surprised the cops were never called to my house during that day. I made the decision to set up the TV outside. It was kind of a mild December day. I had both my boys were a little bit younger at the time, so didn't want to disrupt nap time or anything like that. If they were having to nap during the Jordan Battle interception return for a touchdown, they were definitely woken up. That's the part where I really thought the cops probably should have been called to my house because I was screaming at the top of my lungs. That we did our favorite plays and all that. That's probably one of my favorite plays too. Isn't going to make the top five or the top 10, but that one really sealed the game for Alabama. The defense played incredible that day. Had been a little bit maligned that year. I think had given up 42 points to Arkansas and gave up 41 to Texas A&M. Had some other performances that weren't really good that year, but played great that day. Obviously, Bryce did his thing, probably won the Heisman Trophy. If he didn't win it at Auburn the week before, he won it the next week, hitting Jameson Williams and hitting Mechie in the game. Just an incredible performance that got Alabama back into the college football playoff where we beat Cincinnati and eventually get to the national championship game. We won't talk about that national championship game today. But again, just one of those games where everybody thought it was Georgia's opportunity that they were going to claim the crown, and it didn't go their way. And the final game we're going to talk about, 2023, is another one of those games. Alabama had to win the game to get into the college football playoff. And even if they hadn't won the game, or even if they had won the game, there were still questions if Alabama was going to get in the college football playoff. Um, Georgia was number one in the country. It looked like a game that Georgia could have rolled over Alabama. And I was at this game in 2023, and that first drive for Georgia where they just ran it down our throats. I really thought that this was the end, that Georgia was going to put it on us, and was a valiant try from Alabama and Jalen Milroe. We had Grave Digger against Auburn the week before, but it just wasn't meant to be. And somehow, some way, Alabama and Nick Saban found a way to top Kirby Smart and Georgia again in the Georgia Dome. Excuse me, not the Georgia Dome, the Mercedes-Benz Dome.
Well, I think you're right. At this point, when it happens multiple times, there is a pattern there, and there is a amped up level of tightness on the other side. Every decision made then is second guessed as they make the call. You think that might be the right call? Should we really do this? Last time we did this, this might have happened. So all that plays into that. And you coaches will say, well, last game doesn't mean anything on this game. Well, yeah, sometimes that's true, but it does affect how you call, how you prepare. Maybe you start second guessing, and maybe you over prepare, and your team can sense you're a little anxious. Your team can sense you're a little nervous, you're a little tight, and it carries over to the players. And just like you said with the fans, you're right. Even this upcoming Saturday, if a couple of plays goes against Georgia, you're right. There will be a lot of consternation in the stands, and you'll probably start seeing it on the sidelines. There'll be concerns, worries, all that. So it is true. Look, eventually, all streaks end, but right now, until it does end, it hasn't ended. So Alabama, and when it comes to the SEC championship games, they have Georgia's number, and Georgia plays very tight when they play Alabama in this circumstance.
I promise it's not because his last name is Branch, but Brian Branch did play an incredible game that day. And Brock Bowers, for people that remember him, great tight end for Georgia. I think he's now at the Las Vegas Raiders. He's a little banged up in that game, but he was still so good and created mismatches for Georgia. And I remember being in the stands watching that game, and every time Georgia was on offense, just trying to figure out where is Brock Bowers and how are we matched up against him? Is it Brian Branch on him? Is it Malachi Moore? Is it trying to put a linebacker on him? But it was a great defensive game plan. I don't know if Kevin Steele gets the credit or T. Rob gets the credit. Obviously, Nick Saban gets a lot of credit for that too. But Alabama goes into halftime up 17-7, hit Jam Miller on the wheel route, hit Jermaine Burton, and Georgia got the ball with 40 seconds left before halftime. And I think ran the ball, maybe took a knee. Both teams started to head to the locker room. And we've talked about some of the loudest cheers that we've ever heard in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And I'm not going to put that cheer for Alabama going into the locker room as one of the loudest, but there was a ton of appreciation behind the Alabama fans rallying around that team at halftime, that they had pretty much taken the fight to Georgia after that first drive for that entire first half. And there were some other big plays within that second half too. Obviously, the touchdowns for both teams and Jalen Milroe, having the big run to end the game. But Georgia got inside the 6 yard line, or got to the 6 yard line with 3 minutes and 30 seconds left when we were up 10, and wouldn't score until it was fourth and goal with about 2:50 left in the game. And I really felt us pushing Georgia to that fourth down and them not scoring on that first play was a huge factor in that game because it continued to take time off the clock. And of course, we were able to just run out the clock at the end of the game. Luckily, also Jalen Milroe felt on his own fumble at the end of the game. You forget that last first down, he dropped the ball and luckily just fell on top of it. And now looking back at the game, clearly didn't know at the time, but that is the last game that Nick Saban won at Alabama. And so that becomes a special game. I had the opportunity to go with my brother-in-law, who's a big Georgia Tech fan. Shout out Matthew Sterling. Also got to go to the game with my dad as well. And you would have hoped that the Alabama machine under Nick Saban would have kept rolling for a few more years, but that wasn't a bad last win for Nick Saban to be able to pull that one out, push Georgia out of winning 3 national championships in a row and putting Alabama back in the college football playoff in 2023, 2024.
No, and you're right. You never realize that's the end of something until you have perspective down the road. And yeah, no one would have thought that was the last victory for Nick Saban as an Alabama coach, but turned out it was. But at least it was a really good one. And you're right. After that first drive, Alabama took the fight to Georgia, which we were a little surprised, and they pretty much controlled the game from there that point then on. Georgia was playing from behind the rest of the game. So tribute to them. Great, great performance after that early drive. And look, proud of what that team accomplished too, given that difficult start, just like this year's team.
Well, now we're on to this year's game. We've obviously seen a precursor where Alabama came out on top earlier this year down in Athens. So I'm gonna let you have first shot. What are you hoping to see? What are you expecting Saturday as Alabama and Georgia again face off for an SEC championship?
Well, before I say that, I think that if you were to ask both coaches off the record in a private room, hey, would either of you be okay if we just said neither one of you have to play this game? I think they would be fine with that because look, there's nothing to gain here now at this point. I think Alabama, win or lose, unless they get blown out, should be able to get in the playoffs. Both teams are beaten to a pulp right now. It's like two mash units trying to play each other. So um, look, Alabama's going to have to do what Alabama does. Georgia's vulnerable in the secondary. Alabama's going to have to figure out a way to get the ball vertical, and that's how you beat Georgia. That's pretty much it. Protect Ty as best you can, and hopefully the Alabama defense does what they've been doing: get to be situational, get a couple of turnovers, flip the field, and make Georgia very uncomfortable. How about that?
These deep balls that we have missed this year, I don't feel like they've been bad misses. They've been off the fingertips. We've had a couple drops at times. I think we're poised in this game to have two touchdown passes of over 40 yards. May not both be over the top, may be a pass that hits short and somebody breaks through for a long run and scores. But I agree. I think we will take our shots against the Georgia defense and try to blow the top off because I expect them to try to send a lot more pressure than what they did in the first game because they've seen Auburn and Oklahoma do that. Kevin Riley had some success for us in the first game. I expect that he's going to be out. I don't know the status of Jam Miller right now. So I'm curious to see if somebody like AK Deer gets involved a little bit more in the running game or the passing game. He had the one catch on a screen pass on that last drive against Auburn last week. And again, shout out to my brother-in-law, Matthew Sterling, big Georgia Tech fan. So we watched the Georgia Tech Georgia game this past week. Georgia did not want to put the ball in Gunnar Stockton's hands to throw it. And so, can Alabama have good eye discipline if they use Stockton as a runner, but also prevent any big plays or getting beat over the top? If Alabama makes it a game where Georgia's got to move it down the field, what we've seen this year is Alabama's defense has been able to prevent teams from moving it down and having long, sustained drives. Even the game in Athens. Georgia's first touchdown came after a three-play drive. They had a double move on the outside and kind of a busted coverage on our side. We bit Damani Jackson bit, and they got the first touchdown there. Their second touchdown, they got a couple big runs, I know, to get in to get down into the red zone before they eventually scored there. So I agree with you. I think both teams would take the opportunity to take it off if they could,
Yep.
which I think is going to be an interesting question going forward for all these conference championship games, because I think there's too much money involved for the conferences to just let them go by the wayside. But you also don't want to push a team out by potentially losing a game that should be in the college football playoff. So that'll be something that will be interesting to watch over the coming years. But as we've talked about, and as our podcast is typically around Alabama history, I think it's very important for Alabama to get out to an early lead and put the pressure on Georgia, not just on the field, but in the stands. And if Georgia can find a way to get a two touchdown lead or a two-score lead, maybe they get a little bit more relaxed. I don't know if I see that happening, especially early. I think it'll be a slugfest early on. But if history tells us anything, you got to like Alabama's chances on finding a way to pull it out some way, somehow against Georgia.
I agree. I look, it's not going to be the for the faint of heart, but even though logic tells me that Georgia probably should win, I'm like you. I'm going to go with Alabama, and I think the game's going to be in the 20s again. So you're going to see another 27-24, or 25-23, or 28-25 game. It's going to be somewhere in that range.
Well, this has been a fun year so far. We're hoping for a fun Saturday. And of course, we're hoping that we get to talk about the college football playoff for Alabama in the coming weeks, whether it's the college football playoff or it's a bowl game, which I don't see happening, but we'll see. We will obviously be here to talk about that and relive some of that Alabama history and give our thoughts going into that game. Before we completely sign off, let me do the Crimson Crossover rundown. We've got the Crimson Crossover podcast. We just talked about Alabama, Clemson, and Alabama, Texas, San Antonio, as those are the two opponents Alabama basketball faced this week. Michael, I know you've got the Blue Collar podcast with Emily Smar. Just released Alabama Crimson Crossover Cross Court with Terrence Oglesby for Clemson, and actually found somebody for Texas San Antonio. So we actually caught a Roadrunner and should have a cross court episode for Texas San Antonio coming out later this week. We've got the M3 show. We've got Golf Adjacent. I know Christian and Cannon are working on some more episodes for Golf Adjacent for our golf fans. And pretty soon we're going to be into spring baseball and the Weekly Joe will be kicking back up. So a lot of things continue to go on at Crimson Crossover. We appreciate everybody's time joining us, listening to us, listening to all of our podcasts. Please continue to like and subscribe to everything we do. It really helps us. We really appreciate the feedback, and we've really appreciated you listening to the Tide Machine with us throughout this season. So, Michael, unless you have anything else to say, I'll sign off as we always.
Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.